You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On at Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, special edition, Locked On Texas Tech, Big 12 Weekly, where we take a glance beyond the confines of the 806 and a few interesting things to dive into here today with the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan. And Chris, one thing we will start with is, as we're a ways away from kickoff, but some of these things will begin to roll out from this sports book or that sports book when you start talking about Big 12 odds and Big 12 favorites. Let's begin there today with really one of the first that I've seen, and want to get your take on some others on the list, and of course where Texas Tech is landing on the list. Here's what it looks like if you're joining us via YouTube. I'll run it down for those listening in via podcast. Number one on the list, you've got Utah, and then it goes K-State, Kansas, Arizona, and the Red Raiders rounding out the top five. Iowa State, number 6, Central Florida, Oklahoma State, Texas Christian, and West Virginia round out the top 10. Anything standing out about this to you as far as favorites and potentially where our Red Raiders land on this list?
Well, I think I need to point out that there's a couple of things. One, I think Texas Tech ends up much higher on this list than I've seen others. Yeah. I've seen some power rankings where you're 8th, 9th, 10th. Okay. I certainly understand it. This is Vegas odds, and what they are factoring into it, as much as anything, is your schedule, in my opinion. That's what I think. And prime example, we see 1, 2, and 3 on that list, Utah and both schools from Kansas, none of which appear on your schedule. And I think that factors into these kinds of dynamics. I think if I was looking at this, I would think that West Virginia is a bit low. Maybe Oklahoma State's a bit low. But I also haven't studied their schedules yet to understand. But I guarantee you that is what Vegas is factoring in here. 4 of your first 5 at home for the Red Raiders, 5 of your first 7. And again, a tricky trip to at Arizona, which is your first road game. You will play at TCU and at Iowa State and Oklahoma State. So you're playing road games at 4, 6, 8, and 9 on said list here that we're looking at or that we're talking about. So, but I think because 1, 2, and 3 are not on your schedule, I think that probably benefits you a bit. But that's about, if you put them at somewhere between 5th and 8th or 9th or something, I can justify it based on, the Baron Morton situation, based on the fact that you kind of started slow the first couple of years here under Joey. But then I can also argue, well, you finished really fast. And if you ever get a situation where you're healthier, I could argue. But I think this particular list has a lot to do with what's coming back and your schedule as much as anything.
Yeah, I was a little interested to see and somewhat surprised to see Texas Tech there where they slot in at number 5. But I think you're on the money, and it's something that we'll kind of have to become more so accustomed to. We got a little taste of this last time around, but as Big 12 fans, not getting everybody in the league anymore. So that becomes a part of the offseason conversation, is who you're dodging or who you are facing. And of course, we're all accustomed to seeing Kansas just dominate the top of the leaderboard. K-State, Kansas. It's a sunflower conference, right? Utah and Kansas State in their respective leagues, sure. But Oklahoma State deserves a little bit more respect because I thought so.
All Mike Gundy does is just win 8+ games and go to a bowl game for now. What is that, 18 years in a row? So, just to throw that out there, I'm jealous of the consistency there. But for Kansas, they have a lot of juice. I think Lance Leipold's gotten a ton of credit, but they have as much of a tenuous quarterback situation as you do, if not more so, because Daniels, who everybody loves, and he was preseason Big 12 this and that last year, he just has not shown no ability to stay healthy. And so much of what they're counting on is his ability to do that. And you have the backup that played a ton last year for them that we saw that is no longer there anymore. And so I don't know, that's my thought there with Kansas. But again, they've got 2 stud running backs and a lot back, and they're well coached, and I get it. But that's not Red Raiders' problem this year. That'll be somebody else dealing with that.
Let us know what you think out there, how you see it, agree or disagree in the YouTube comments. Love to hear from you. Let's move on to something else, a conversation that seems like it's gaining more and more steam. And once upon a time, to me, this was kind of a pipe dream. I thought this would be wise for these guys to maybe pursue a long time ago. We're talking about a potential split of the group of five, essentially away from a former Power Five, now Power Four, roughly about 60 to 65 programs that make up that landscape before you get into the Mountain West Conference and the like. And it kind of depends on what postseason format I guess we're talking about, Chris, as to how I would feel about this over the years. Once upon a time in the BCS, it's like Utah, Texas Christian. They needed to be wearing ski masks at the end of every year because they were robbing the BCS blind. You run through a weaker league, and then you wind up with the payout like what they were winding up with. I mean, it was a cash grab, and it was a good time for the most part for those types of programs and those types of conferences at that time. You get into a playoff era, especially a four-teamer, you got no chance. And that's when I really began to think like, think in an innovative way. If you're a leader within that category, why would you not try to push towards something else? I know it may be kind of tough to stomach at first, but really enhancing what you are in your category as opposed to being diluted via comparison to the bigger category didn't seem all that wise either. Now, we got an expanded playoff coming up where maybe there is a better chance. I don't think there's any maybe. There's going to be a better chance potentially for one of those to get in and compete for a path to a national championship, but still a very long road to hoe. So some coaches being asked about this across the country, and wanted to give you some thoughts from a couple that we're obviously familiar with in Sonny Dykes and the pride of Shallowater, Texas, Eric Morris, the UNT head coach who will be coming to town in a few months with his team. And this was an article from Dave Campbell's Texas Football where these quotes were found. First, from Texas Christian head coach Sonny Dykes says, quote, "There's got to be a split between the Power Four and Group of Five eventually." Goes on to say there's such a big difference right now between the haves and the have-nots, and I think we'll eventually split into two separate divisions. Alabama and Louisiana Tech, one of his prior stomping grounds, aren't playing the same sport, he says. Goes on to say those jobs are even harder now also because if one of your players has a great season, probably getting plucked away, your only chance is to build a great culture and hope that keeps most of your roster intact. As for Eric Morris at North Texas, he says, quote, "At some point, the Group of Five has to step back and let the powers be with money, which is the Power Four, and do their own thing." He says, at that point, the question becomes, how do we stay relevant to our fans and to a broader audience? So it really seems like there's some more steam behind this potential movement. You might have seen out there that there's consideration of the Group of Five, like putting out their own top 25 rankings just within those leagues or the category of those leagues. And I wonder if someday you might have a postseason event of their own. Seems to work very well for the football championship subdivision, Chris, where you've got great crowds, you got a big tournament, and I don't think they've ever had any issue with making that interesting to their fan bases. So maybe there's more here than some might assume at first glance. First, today's episode brought to you by Monopoly Go. And we've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime of the big game, and the scoreboard's not looking too good. You're feeling low. You're not sure you or your team are going to be able to pull out a win. And that's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. And you can do just that with the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go. Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies and tell them all about it whenever you're kicking their butts. You can also play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, or charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go today for free in the App Store or on Google Play. Maybe there's more here than some might assume at first glance.
Do I think that group of five schools or mid-major schools, however you want to phrase them, do I think they'll quit playing the Power Four like in the non-conference? I mean, because you've got, speaking of Eric Morris, he's on your schedule and bringing his North Texas team to Lubbock this year. I don't think you're going to get away from that. I think that will continue. I think the Power Four conferences need that as much as the group of five schools do. You fund the group of five schools, but you don't want to get a situation where you can't get anybody to come play you at home. You need home games, all the stuff. So there's a fit there that will continue, in my opinion. I do think you're going to get to where there is a split here, and there could be separate postseason events. And here's why. Here's ultimately why you get into a split. This revenue sharing that is coming in some form or fashion. Some schools can afford to share revenue. Some schools just simply cannot. And I think that there's going to be the group that can afford to fund that and do that the way that, the Power Four leagues could do, specifically the Big Ten and the SEC versus everybody else. And that's where that's what's going to ultimately cause this to go different ways. Whether you get into rankings, separate or a separate postseason, not sure yet, although I do think there could be a separate playoff system. I don't know what that looks like per se as far as TV ratings or what that's worth, but I think that the coaches at group of five schools, and I've heard Eric Morris actually talk about this, he did a separate interview about this, but you want some incentive for your fans and your team to go be able to go win a title. It's somewhat unrealistic to think that if you're there's a slim chance, but if you're the North Texas or the SMUs or the Liberties or whatever, that you can get into to be the 12th or the 14th team in the playoff and then make some hay. That's highly unlikely. But what if you have a separate deal and we can dangle that carrot and we can keep players on our roster that don't want to transfer because they want to stay here and win a championship or something. There's just some incentive for fans, players, all this stuff. But I think it's the revenue sharing part of it that's going to ultimately cause this, because that's coming soon. And because you've got some of these coaches, they're out there trying to find ways to raise money. They're not coaching football. They're out there. Eric Morrison, in one interview that I heard, he's like, I had a meeting earlier today. I'd like to have been sitting in my office drawing up plays, but I had a meeting earlier at lunch about, hosting some concerts and stuff so we can raise money, and the surplus goes to our collective that we just kind of got going and stuff. And it's just so that's what they're dealing with at that level. And it's just the gap is continuing to get wider and wider and wider. And some of these new TV contracts hadn't even kicked in yet.
Right.
So there's just some food for thought there, but it's the revenue sharing that will ultimately cause the split more than anything else.
Yeah, you get into coaching because maybe you love being around a team, love being around those student athletes. You just love football in general, never anticipating you're going to need to know something about how to book a Willie Nelson show. But all things may fall under the same umbrella eventually. I say enhance what you've got to enhance. And yes, it is a very long road or long odds that you're going to find your way into this. And it may take some time to become accustomed to, but I think eventually it could turn into something that is more interesting now than those aforementioned programs. By the way, you're talking about ACC member SMU, even though there's nothing monetarily to suggest that they're an ACC member, but they're on the list. They're on the list. I think eventually you might find that, a player or coach or whatever is more interested in a postseason event that leads to some hardware in a playoff setting as opposed to going just to the Idaho Potato Bowl. And that's the max. That's the mountaintop of a group of five postseason right now. So I don't know. Let us know how you see that one. Before we're out of here, Chris, I wanted to touch on this back to something more Big 12 centric. Was curious if you had seen Farmageddon heading overseas. Now, this will happen in 2025. You might have seen the announcement that Kansas State and Iowa State are going to be hooking up in Dublin, Ireland to open up the season. Again, this is 2025. This year, Florida State, Georgia Tech opening their season in Ireland for the 2024 calendar, but heading over to Dublin to take in the peat. The peat. I got to tell you, if Texas Tech was ever in this spot, I think there would be some vexation you'd be hearing from your boy. I don't really fathom a scenario where I'd be a big fan of this, and I'm wondering about those fans in Ames and in Manhattan and how they're best served by this thing. What do you make of this type of deal?
I'd love to know whose home game this is, because this is one of your meteor conference games. It's got a name to it, right?
Right.
And there's not that many of those left with your newly formed league here. So I don't know whose home game it is, but I want to say maybe this is like the Iowa State home game, and so I don't know if they conceded and said, yeah, but I know either one or both of these schools. I saw that report when this kind of after it came out, but one of these schools said that they were getting $2 million for it. I think that's on top of expenses to go do this. I'd feel much different about it if it was a non-conference. And that's what so many, just like you just mentioned, the Florida State Georgia Tech game. Although that is, a situation there where, that's an ACC game, I guess. But in prior times, it has been, like a non-conference game. But I think Notre Dame's played Navy, I think, and there's been some other games that have kind of happened over there. But that's tough to give up a home gate. Now you played Oklahoma State in Japan. In what is that, 88?
A Tokyo Bowl or
Barry Sanders.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, but I would probably be offsides there if you took if you were going to play your Baylor, your TCU, your Oklahoma State or something like that over in Ireland, I'd be like, what are we doing here? And that's kind of what they're asking these folks to do. So I don't know, maybe someone would look at it and go, that's a great trip, let's just sign me up. But in some situations, I would say, that's the whole point of these games, is to have the fun and the festival and the camaraderie and all that stuff in your home stadiums. That's why you build these cathedrals.
Yeah, and the economic impact on these college towns, I think just none of it really sits right with me. And just a quick glance, they were in Manhattan last year, scheduled to be in Ames this year. So maybe it's a K-State home game that would be given up in 2025. I'm not quite sure if that's the way it would work out, but that's the last year and what's coming up this year. They'll be playing Farmageddon there in Ames. And non-conference or conference, I don't care. Somebody's going to have to help me understand why this needs to be a deal. And it's probably what you already said, the $2 million, I guess. But I call me a nationalist, an America First guy. Why are we doing a favor for Ireland? And it's kind of the same thing with like the Big 12's Mexico thing that quietly got put on the back burner. I don't know if anybody noticed that. They're like, maybe we're not going to do this right now. I just don't get it, man. It doesn't serve to me the fans' interest of either one of those programs. It doesn't serve those towns, which I think, as I've already stated, and something I'm glad to see about the college football playoff coming up. There's going to be some of that impact there. I didn't even like taking Tech and Baylor to Dallas or Arlington. I didn't get that either. I was ticked off that you were missing a home opportunity, whether competitively speaking, by the way, or again, local economic impact. I mean, I know some people might just poo-poo that aspect of it, but I wasn't a fan of that. Keep college games on campuses. It's always been one of the biggest rackets in America that your former two largest and most well-resourced members in the University of Texas and Oklahoma never visited one another. They get busy there in a 50-50 neutral site just south of the Tilt-A-Whirl. And that always struck me as just, I guess something you can't get rid of because it's tradition, but you know what I'm saying. So let us know what you think about that. If you're a Tech fan and Tech was in this spot, are you thumbs up or are you thumbs down on that type of opportunity? Chris, appreciate the bonus time once again, man. We'll let you get back to resuming the weekend. Hope it's a great one, and we'll be back together on Monday.
Love you all out there, people. Enjoyed it. We'll talk to you at some point again very, very soon. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening to this one. These extra ones are fun to do.
That's right. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. For Chris, I'm Casey. Thanks for being out there, and we hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.